Hey guys, welcome to the Mom Show. I'm your host, Courtney Doyle, and this is a place I am giving you permission to not have it all together. Today's episode features Jen VanKommer, a mom whose journey through grief, grace, and God's faithfulness will deeply resonate with so many of you. We discuss the sudden loss her family faced when they were unable to return to their missionary work overseas during the pandemic. Stranded in the United States, they had to navigate the loss of home, livelihood, and community. Through this painful season, Jen discovered how God's grace and provision brought unexpected restoration. This conversation is a powerful reminder that even in the hardest moments, God is faithful, and what we think is lost can become the foundation for something new. Grab a coffee, let's dive in and hear from my friend, Jen. Hey guys, welcome back to the show. My guest today is Jen, and she has got some incredible encouragement for you. Jen, as you know, this season we are doing Help. I'm a Mom Who, and I'm having my guest fill in the blank and share their stories. And so if I said to you, Jen, how would you fill in the blank on Help? I'm a Mom Who. What would you say to that?
I would say that I am a mom who has experienced the death of a dream. My husband and I, we had lived overseas and had a great life and ministry overseas. And then the pandemic came along. And as you know, that just shifted a lot of things for a lot of
Yeah.
people. But for us, we were actually in the States at the time when that happened. And we ended up not being able to go back because there was lockdown and we couldn't get
Mhm.
visas back to the country that we lived in. And eventually we felt like the Lord was really leading us to stay back in the States. But basically, we lost our home. We lost everything. We had to sell all our possessions. Our friends helped us sell everything off, but we had to start completely over, completely from scratch back in America during the pandemic. And so it was just a lot. It was very hard, but walk through that, been on the other side of that, and just learned a lot about grief and loss, but also just God's faithfulness and redemption. I feel like my family and I are really living in that story right now of God just redeeming something that we thought this is the worst thing that could happen to us, but it really
Wow.
wasn't.
Wow. I'll be totally honest. I think every time I hear about somebody who how the pandemic affected them, there was lots of job lost. Of course, there was life lost,
Mhm.
but I have never heard anybody say we were stationed somewhere else. We
Mhm.
happened to be in America at the time. Where were you living? What country were you living in?
Yeah, so we were actually living in Southeast Asia at the time, and we had a ministry there, and again, we loved it. My oldest daughter, she was just a little baby when we moved over there. We came back to the States actually just for a quick visit. It was gonna be 3 months, and it was March 1st, 2020. And as you can imagine, remember that just a couple
Yeah,
weeks later, lockdown happened, and just like everyone else, we were just like, "Okay, is this gonna go on a few weeks? Is this gonna go on
sure.
a few months?" And no one really thought that it was gonna be as long as it was. Meanwhile, our home and all of our stuff and our jobs and the people we were working with were overseas in Southeast Asia. And so, yeah, we ended up here in the States during that time, just living off the generosity of friends and family members. I think we lived in 6 different places during that time. We just shifted as people opened their home to us and stayed with people. Because of course, we didn't have a home. Our home was overseas, even though we couldn't get back there with our visa situation, and so
Yeah.
we ended up staying with my parents, we ended up staying with my husband's parents, and of course, that feels like a failure in and of itself. I'm like, I'm a grown woman, I have children, but I'm living with my parents again, so it's
Yeah.
a whole bunch of things happen there, like the shame of that, but also just the trauma of that, like not
Mhm.
being able to go back to our home, switching homes so much, and we've had to work through that with our daughter as well of, yep, we lived in 6 different places over the course of a year and a half, and just as the Lord led us into different things, and eventually after that year and a half, we felt like God was closing that door, that chapter, and just saying, "You're not gonna return to the field, and you're gonna make a new life in the States," which was incredibly difficult, but we went there, and like I said, now we're living it, we're doing it.
Wow. And so how long did you wait before you began to before you realized? You said it was a year and a half. Is that when you were like, "Okay, we're gonna sell the house there. We're gonna
Mhm.
sell all of our belongings." I just you say you can't imagine, but I
Mhm.
shared with you before we started recording, we lived in Louisiana. That's where we were born and raised. And so we lost our home in 2005 to a hurricane. And I know that there's a lot of listeners that are from around here that have either experienced terrible flooding or hurricanes as well, who have lost their homes. And though it was out of your control, the hurricane is completely out of our control. The
Uh-huh.
pandemic was completely out of your control. It does feel very much like a failure. And let's lean into that a little bit. How does that define you as a mom? Did you have
Mhm.
one or two children at the time that this
So
happened?
I had one when we were living overseas, my oldest, and then I was actually came back to the States. We got pregnant with my second COVID baby as it was,
Uh-huh.
but even after we had my son in 2021, we got him a little passport just when he was 3 weeks old because we thought, "Of course, we're gonna go back overseas. We're gonna things are starting to open up more. It should be good." But, yeah, it just slowly started to become really clear to my husband and I think God is actually shutting this door, which is the scariest thing because we had uprooted our lives in America to make this decision to go do ministry and move overseas. We were living in the Pacific Northwest at the time, and we sold all of our furniture, sold our cars, all this stuff to move overseas and then make a whole new life overseas, which is a
Mhm.
challenge in and of itself because we're in a country
Sure.
that doesn't speak English, so we're having to navigate different languages. But we had our house, we had our friends, we had all these things overseas, but then to just lose them in a minute, and even now, here it is 2025, I have still never been back to the home that we had in Asia.
Oh, wow.
We've still never been back there. My husband, he eventually went back. My son was very little, and so I stayed back in the States, but yeah, my husband went to wrap up some loose ends, get rid of our house. We ended up giving our car to some friends. Thankfully, here in the States, a church blessed us with a car, which was
Wow.
amazing because we didn't yeah, it was so incredible and so generous, and we were so thankful for that. But when you really think of we lost everything, we had to rebuild from scratch, and of course, we had a little bit of emergency savings, but that went very quickly, and so
Sure.
just figuring out financially how to
Mhm.
rebuild and to be honest,
Mhm.
hopefully this is a benefit to some of your listeners listening. I feel like a lot of people, it's really hard for us to talk about finances and hard to talk about financial struggles and to say, "Hey, I'm really struggling with this, and we're maybe not making as much money as we thought, or we really have to save or whatever." And yeah, that's one of the things that we really faced was the financial struggle of having to start completely over. And so again, there's just a lot of shame around that and a lot of people that
Mhm.
aren't really talking about those things. And God's definitely brought us through a process of making
Mhm.
sense of that and being okay with where he's brought us from and what he's brought us into.
Yeah. I'd asked you what was the most unexpected lesson or blessing, and you said failure's not the end. You
Mhm.
just spoke to that. It feels like a failure, but it very much is not the end. When did you begin to realize we aren't failing? We can actually thrive in this and we can get through this. Was there ever a point or a defining moment that you realized this is for sure God's will and he's going to see us through?
Yeah. Well, I think all of us, we did a lot of processing during the pandemic, of being
Yeah.
alone. And I remember reading a lot and just, yeah, it was just really a lot of time that I got to spend with the Lord. And I think I was also, I had some counseling resources and doing therapy and just working through stuff because there was such deep grief. And to be honest, depression, like really hard to think here, my life is just crazy. And
Mhm.
everything that I had worked for, everything that we invested in and really felt like the Lord had called us to, that's not it anymore. And of course, when we were doing ministry overseas, we had financial supporters and churches who were supporting us back here in the States. And so to have to say to them, we're not going to go back, we feel like God has closed this door, is really, it feels very embarrassing, very shameful. But again, the Lord just teaching us that it's okay. I'm with you, I'm guiding you, and I'm going to get you through this. And in 2021, just a year and a half into this whole thing, all the pieces just clicked together and made that decision. There's been hard moments for sure and walking through things, but I think even now, we look at our life and we're like, this is great. The place that God has us now, I never ever would have thought that this would have been so
Mhm.
great. I'm involved in ministry. I have these great ministry roles that I'm doing. My husband, he's an engineer by trade. And so he works as an engineer and he works for this company that he really loves. And our kids are thriving. For us, or for me rather, a big thing was coming back to my hometown because we
Mhm.
actually live with my parents. So we live in this split level house, sharing this house with them. But I again, the sort of shame around that of, "Oh, you're an adult living with your parents," but God has
Mhm.
really blessed our family dynamic. My children get to see their grandparents every day,
Yeah.
and that's exciting for them. So many beautiful things have come out of this, and it was true
Mhm.
that everything we thought was a failure was really not. God was really working those things for his purposes and to get us to a great place where we are thriving as a family.
It's so crazy. I can attest that even 20 years later, after we lost our home and we had to rebuild, similar story in that we moved. I want to say we were at final count of 8 or 9 moves within our own city after the hurricane. And so it was like evacuate and stay because there had been a hurricane before that. And so there was nowhere to rent. So we bounced around to a couple of rentals and just all the things with 5 children in tow, 2 dogs, everything that was valuable when we evacuated for the hurricane was split between 2 cars. And we did salvage some other things. We were able to salvage quite a few other things, though the house had been destroyed, but it took 2 years to get back,
Yeah.
quote, unquote, "home," and then we weren't even there a year, and my husband got an opportunity to move to Texas, and it was a very
Mm.
easy decision at that point because the city was still not rebuilt. We still felt very upturned. It was like we still didn't feel settled from just all the chaos of the 2 years previous. And so we were like, what's the worst thing that can happen? We go to Texas, we don't love it. It's really not that far from our
Mm.
hometown. Let's try it. And it was a complete start over for us financially, similar to what you were saying. But even 20 years later, there are still things that we talk about that are
Mhm.
pre-hurricane and post-hurricane.
Yeah.
But I would say probably over the last 5 or 6 years is really when I was able to start seeing not that there had not been provision all along the way, because there certainly had been, and God just showing up in the nick of time for different things. But I would say, like, in the last 5 or 6 years, we really started to see where not only was he providing, he was restoring, and
Mhm.
things that were lost, things that we dreamed of that we thought would never come to fruition, he just was like, "Here." And the story of he will restore what the locusts have eaten is very
Yes.
true, and it took
Yes.
a while. It wasn't like this happened in a year, it's been 20 years, but I can see where it's just little God winks where he said, "This was the plan all along." And so, will you share with me some of the ways that you've seen God show up in the most unexpected ways through this challenge?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of personal healing, I think, has been huge. And you know what? I met with a Christian counselor and we were processing through some things. And one thing that she pinpointed in something that I said, she asked me about my anger with God. And I was like, "What?" My anger with God. And I realized that I hadn't really felt free to express that before. I was like, "That's not okay to feel angry." But she really brought me through this process of just I needed to be honest with God about some of the feelings that I was feeling. I was
Yeah.
feeling disappointed, feeling like a failure, feeling mad. God, we just lost things that we invested in financially, This is hard. This is really hard.
Did it feel
Yeah,
more angry? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to
it's
ask, did
okay.
it feel like you were maybe more also could have been more angry because you were doing what he called you to do? I'm in another
Exactly.
country. I'm working for you, Lord. I'm doing
Mhm.
mission work for you. And now you have
Yes.
closed that door. That would be very confusing to me.
Yes, yes, because we hear all the things, I know one thing that we used to say a lot was like, where God guides, he provides, and God is gonna be there with you in these things. So, yeah, to have everything be shifted. And again, realizing my own kind of internal things that I felt like, I guess the good girl, like I can't bring these things to God, these messy parts of I'm mad. I feel like a failure. I feel angry about this, but just the freedom to be honest with those things. I think really over the last couple years, it's been a lot of studying the Psalms, to be honest, and just seeing David was so real with God and just all
Yeah.
the things, all the anger. And I was like, okay, this is okay. Like we see this biblical example of people just like pouring their hearts out to God in honesty. And I don't know. So that was something that really helped us get through everything, helped me get through things as well.
One of the unexpected ways is that maybe you needed to be more real and more
Yeah,
honest with where you were. I think sometimes we think we have to get ourselves all cleaned up and everything has to look perfect. And
totally.
I can't be honest about that. And we begin to compare. What you went through is horrible during the pandemic, but there was somebody around the corner who was losing a loved one. When we
Mhm.
start comparing the loss, all of a sudden it's,
Yeah.
I feel guilty that I'm angry with you. At least you didn't take one of my loved ones or whatever it may be. And
Right.
so we begin to
Right.
think that our pain and our grief should be minimized because others is greater. And really, seasons of life are relative to where we're at, and it doesn't
Mm.
make them feel any better, make them any easier. At the end of the day, everybody is really going through something hard. And
Yeah.
when we can be honest about our tough places, first and foremost with the Lord, He sees
Mhm.
us through, then we can turn around and be the testimony to our neighbor and say, hey, I may have not experienced what you're experiencing as far as
Yes.
difficulty, but this is what I've been through, which is exactly what we're doing right now,
Exactly.
is encouraging another mom to know you're not alone. There are moms out here. We are all going through some things.
Yeah.
Gosh, I just remember being in fix it mode when we lost the
Mhm.
house.
Yeah.
And when the world was falling apart around us, it was, we're fine. We're fine. Everything's
Mhm.
fine. Mom's going to fix it. Mom's going to pretend like everything's great. And it's
Yeah.
funny now that our children, the five of them that lived through that, our number six was born in Texas, so he didn't live through that.
Yeah.
It's funny now that they're all adults for us to start really confessing sometimes things that we were doing to make ends
Mm.
meet, to make them not know the reality of what was happening. Have y'all had that experience where you, as a mom, got into fix it mode and protection mode, and your kids are
Yeah.
completely clueless to really the gravity of what was happening?
Yeah. But it is, it's hard because, yeah, you just want to shield them from some things. And even for me, a little bit of my backstory, even before then, I grew up in a family. We had a lot of kids. My mom had six kids. She was a teenage mother. And so we really struggled with finances and we did not have a lot of money. And so I was very determined as a mom. Okay, I want to get past this. Like I got a college education, was able to get out and do all these things and do great career stuff, ministry stuff. And so to be at this place where I'm like, oh my gosh, are my children going to struggle in the same way that maybe my family struggled financially? And I didn't want this for them. And yeah, that's a hard balance to figure out how do I be honest with my kids, but how do I shield them or what should I shield them from? It's actually been really amazing as I've parented my 7-year-old. She is so intuitive. Nothing gets past her.
Yeah.
She's just aware of everything. And so I feel like the Lord has really taught me in parenting her. You can be honest with her. She's very aware of what's happening in the moment when she asks a question, or if I have the news on, she'll want to know something about it. And it's just, it would be easy for me to turn that off and be like, oh, we're not going to talk about that or whatever. But
Mhm.
she has questions. She's so curious about the world and these things. So we talk about a lot of hard things with her. And I just pray in those moments, okay, God, help me to fit this to a 7-year-old level or whatever age she was at when she asked those questions. And with that, we've talked about all kinds of hard things. And the hard thing about finances of maybe we don't have as much money as so and so down the street. Our family, we are working hard. We're doing what we can, but we love you guys. Your needs are taken care of. Look at all these great things that we have in our life. And so just being able to share that with the kids, I think has been hard, but really good just to be honest with them.
Yeah. You mentioned that you were navigating multiple jobs and building a business and raising the
Mhm.
young children. And all
Yes.
of that sounds incredibly challenging and busy. Do you have a key habit or a mindset that's helped you manage all that you're managing as a mom
Mhm.
without burning yourself out?
That is so good. I think for me, one of the things that I'm passionate about is helping people through burnout. And especially like
Mm.
women who are in ministry, because I've been in ministry for my whole adult life. And I feel like I've experienced seasons of burnout. And I'm an Enneagram 3. I'm very, okay, got to do all the things and go
Yeah.
achiever. But I have just learned so much about rest and the value of rest. And one of my jobs is I am the director of discipleship for my church. And so I did this teaching once on Sabbath and Sabbath rest. And I feel sometimes we feel this as teachers. We are teaching what we actually need to learn the most.
Yeah.
And so the
Yeah.
Lord was really convicting me in that process. And so we're going to get serious about Sabbath. So my husband and I, we put different rhythms into place, and we're really going to take our Sabbath day and rest and play and have no plans and just enjoy the kids. We could go to playgrounds and play with them, and we could play games. And in our culture, it's so hard to do that because there's things and there's all
Go,
kinds of
go,
birthday
go, do, do,
parties and
do.
like, yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. But one thing that we've really had to try to do is rearrange our lives to include a godly rest. And not just a Sabbath rest, but I try to do retreats, just a little, okay, here's my half day that I take, and my husband watches the kids, and I just take a few hours with the Lord. And that's a couple times a year. And even that is refreshing of, okay, I'm going to put this in my calendar, be really intentional about taking this
Mhm.
rest, taking this break. And again, I'm a discipleship leader in ministry. And so if I'm not doing this stuff, I can't teach this. And so really made sure that I am trying to live it out as best as I can. But I would definitely say scheduling rest, making time for rest. I think
Mhm.
that my husband and I, we've really learned our limits and just, okay, we could get this far. And this is our point that we're going to burn out if we don't take a break. And really scrutinizing our time commitments and thinking about what do we do in a week? What do we do in a month? And do we really need to do this? Do our
Yeah.
kids really need to be in all the things? And of course,
Yeah.
I want to give my kids the things I never had. So, oh, okay, let's sign them up for this class or this sport or whatever. But just realizing the times that we have together of rest as a family, and we try as much as we can to make weeknights just family time. And so I have two
Mhm.
children, and it's just the four of us. And we have so much fun and just we can be present with them. And that's really what I wanted my kids to take away and remember about our family. Yeah, we had family time all the time where we just connected, and my parents really valued me and they would play with me and we do
Yeah.
fun things together.
Yeah. And it is. That's so important. And it's important to teach that to our kids because if you look around, there's so many kids that are burnout.
Yep.
They
Yeah.
they don't want to do all the things. They may think they do because their friends are doing it, but the reality
Totally.
is I can see it in my own son, our youngest, who's still at home and in the thick of sports and things like that. And
Mhm.
I can start seeing it in just behaviors that he's having. And the other day he came home and he was kicking his shoes off. And the way he was kicking his shoes off was just like a level of frustration. And he went and got something out of the cabinet and kind of shut it. And I was like, hey, did something happen at school? Oh. And I was like, you seem off, like, something doesn't seem right.
Oh,
No, no, and he went on about his business, and finally, after a few minutes of me just observing him, I looked at him and was like, "Hey, I need you to do me a favor," and he was like, "What?" Typical teenager. "Wow, what are you gonna make me
right.
do?" And I said, "I need you to go to my bedroom, unmake my bed, get in the bed, turn on a cartoon, and take a
Oh.
nap." And he was
Oh.
like, "What?" And I was like, "I think you need a nap." I think you're tired. We're remodeling his bedroom right now, and so we've had to
Okay.
move a mattress around, and one night he ended up sleeping on the couch because the stain smell was so strong in his room, and so I know he wasn't sleeping
Oh.
really great, and he was like, "You want me to nap?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want you to go take a nap." And he was like, "Oh, okay. Look, Jen, I need somebody to walk in this house and look at me and say, 'Courtney, go get in your bed, turn on a great romance movie,
Exactly.
and take a nap.'" Not happening,
Totally.
Jen. It's not happening.
You know
But
what?
we gotta
Oh,
do that.
yeah, yeah. I just love to tell people one thing that I often say is that sometimes the most spiritual thing we can do is sleep. And so I've learned that. And I used to feel bad for taking naps or for getting overwhelmed or tired. This is how God designed our bodies. We live at this crazy pace now that we weren't really designed to live at. But God designed our bodies for rest. You were talking about your son, and like my children, like I said, are still little, but we read the Jesus Storybook Bible or the Beginner's Bible. And in the Beginner's Bible, there's this great picture of Jesus asleep on the boat during the storm.
Yeah.
And just the little wording right under that picture said, Jesus was tired, so he took a nap. And I just love that so much. Of, yeah, that's right. Jesus took a nap. And my kids can look at that and we're like, this is a good thing, you guys. Like when
Yeah.
our bodies are tired, we can rest. And that's how God designed it. Even Jesus needed to rest. And so they're, oh, okay, this is good. So I'd
Yeah.
say that to moms too. It's a simple thing we teach our children, but also it's good to rest and it's hard to rest, but to be intentional to make that time just to relax, have some alone time, downtime. We've really built up a network of babysitters for our kids.
Yeah.
And just, we need some time. My husband and I need some date nights. Or if my husband's working, just, I have some friends who can come over, or even a middle school girl, a mother's helper who could just give me some time alone that I need.
Yeah.
Like when my 3-year-old, he's busy and active 3-year-old, I just need a little bit of a break. Think just
Mhm.
that we know that we need to have a break, but just giving ourselves permission. This is a good thing and it's necessary.
Yeah. I want to shift a little bit. You mentioned that you're a spiritual director,
Mm,
and one of the things that you have extensively talked with people about is grief and loss.
mm,
And I'm leading to that because I recently lost my parents. And so I've been in
mm,
a really deep grief, and
mm,
rest was a huge factor in that. Like I would find myself getting really exhausted and I just need to lay down for a minute. We're talking about this grief and this loss that you experienced during the pandemic, but
mm.
grief and loss is just, it's all around us, whether it be a home, a miscarriage, a parent, a friendship for us or for our children, a change, even if it's a good thing, even if it's, hey, we've got a job opportunity and we're moving out of state or we're moving to a different neighborhood, you're still losing something, you're still leaving something.
Yeah,
You may grieve relationships or situations that you were in. Let's chat about that for just a minute. How do we walk
sure.
through that as a mom with children, protecting ourselves and taking care of ourselves and also helping them navigate it as well?
Yeah, I think that's so good and that's so important. I know you've talked about on the show before being very pro therapy and pro counseling, and when people need help, going to seek that help. And for me, yeah, I've been in counseling and therapy as well, but what I do as a spiritual director, it's similar in the same vein of a counselor. I'm not a mental health professional, but I am a trained listener and I have women come to meet with me and share about their stories, share about the grief or loss in different ways and how that affects their spiritual life and relationship with God. And sometimes too, that loss or that grief is surrounding things like their church. Maybe there was a church split in their community or some kind of church hurt. And they're like, I don't know how to process this, who to process that with. And that's exactly what I do as a spiritual director. I help listen to people's stories, help them walk through that grief process. And I
Mm,
think one of the biggest things is even with counseling, with anything, when you go to see somebody, the hardest part is making that phone call or sending that email of, okay, I do want to get this help because I realize once we go there, once we make that appointment, we can start digging into things. And I
mhm.
think it's good for us to be able to try to do some work on our own. I've read some great books or journaled about my thoughts or things surrounding grief. But to have someone sit with me and
Yeah.
ask me questions and hear my story. And sometimes we just need to talk out our stories. And
Mhm.
there's real value in that. And again, we see that more commonly therapy and that kind of thing. But with a spiritual director, part of the nuance with that is we also take a lot of time to pray together. I pray with my clients and we're praying in that session and even taking time to just be silent and just say, hey, can we just sit with this for a few minutes and see if even now if the Lord has something that he wants to reveal about this. And so it's really awesome for me, being able to walk alongside women going through different periods of grief or transition and just watching the Lord minister to them in real time.
Mhm.
We'll just sit there together and we'll be silent and then ask, did the Lord speak anything to you? And it's always so amazing how God speaks to people differently. Somebody
Yeah.
might be like, yeah, I felt like there was a picture that God gave me, or somebody else is, oh, there's this verse that he reminded me of, or whatever it is. And then we'll talk about that. And towards the end of our session, it'll, not that everything is fixed, but it'll be, okay, God has something that he wants to say in this. And together we could listen for the Holy Spirit. And that's what I tell people in my job. I'm a trained listener to listen to the person that I'm with, but also listen to the Holy Spirit and
Mhm.
just say, God, what do you want to reveal to this person? I'm not directing anything. We talk about that in spiritual direction is I'm not giving advice or anything, but just letting God do his work and letting him speak to people. And I love doing that. I take on new directees, my clients, and they come to see me and we meet for about an hour every month. And that's just a great time for them to be able to process. And like
Yeah.
you said, especially in seasons of grief, whatever it is, we all have things that we could talk out and work out and have someone pray with us, walk
Mhm.
alongside us in that struggle.
Yeah. And what you're doing is you're giving people permission to slow down because I think when we are in the midst of these difficult moments, life is still happening. The world didn't stop
Right.
because you're struggling or
Yeah.
because you're grieving. And so, as moms, we still are multitasking all of the things and experiencing this deep pain, whatever it may be. And what you're doing is you're saying, hey, let's take an hour of isolated time that
Yeah.
if we just need to be quiet for a minute
Mm.
so we can hear God's voice. I think sometimes
Yeah.
I hear God's voice the most at 4 a.m. And
Mm.
when he wakes me up, I'm like, really, Lord? I'm more of a 9 a.m. kind of girl. And you know what he says back? But you don't stop. It come at 8 o'clock, 7:30, 8 o'clock. I
Yes.
don't get a word in edgewise with you. And so he's, I'm going to wake you up in the middle of the night because that's the only
Yeah.
time you're quiet and I can catch you. And so it's become our thing where I go through seasons where there are literally long stretches of time that
Mhm.
I'm awakened at 4 o'clock on the nose. And when I wake up and I look at my phone, I'm like, oh, hey, God. And
Yep.
so that's what you're doing is you're also giving people permission to
For sure.
pause and really think about it. And a lot of times, our healing does completely start with our ability to share our story. And so, your story is an incredible one of great
Mm.
loss and pivot and then encouragement. If you had to give advice
Mhm.
to yourself 5 years ago, 6 years ago,
Mhm.
let's go back
Mhm.
6 years. We're pre pandemic, life is great in
Mhm.
Asia. What advice would you give to that mama now that you've experienced what you've experienced?
That's so good. I think just to trust that the bad things aren't the end. Like what I think is the worst case scenario, God shows up. He's there and he's redeeming things in ways that, again, we look back. Yeah, my husband and I talk about this. We look back 6 years ago, and we never would have pictured that being here and back in my hometown. But I think I'd tell myself then, God can make something beautiful from this,
Mm.
the beauty from ashes, from loss and grief. And yeah, just to trust that he's still leading, that he's still providing, and that he's good.
So
Yeah.
good. I end every conversation with asking, is there something that you're praying for that we could
Mm.
join in prayer with you? And do you have a verse that you could share with the listeners?
Yeah, that's so good. I think just being through all of this, different stories, I really love the verse in Lamentations 3:22 and 23. I have it on a little coffee mug I got at TJ Maxx, but
Yeah.
I love it. It's about God's mercies being new every morning, and that the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They're new every morning. Great is your faithfulness, God. And I grew up in church. We used to sing that song. That was that exact verse.
Yeah.
But it just means so much more now. I think
Mhm.
is that he God is faithful and he's been faithful through all these years. But no matter what happens today, no matter what happens tomorrow, there is fresh new mercy. We had multiple miscarriages when we were living overseas. We had trauma, and I remember being in a hospital room and healing after losing a pregnancy. And I God's mercy was there with me then, but years later, he is still faithful and he's the same, but there's different kind of mercy today. There's different kind of mercy tomorrow for whatever the situation is. And so just being reminded that God is faithful and that even the worst things, and we used to do this exercise, what if the worst happens? It's okay. Even if the worst happens, God is still faithful and his mercies are new for every single day. And so hopefully that encourages someone, who's going through something, and just to remember that God was faithful in the past. And even though you might not feel it today, that mercy and grace and love is there fresh for you in this situation you're facing today.
That's a wonderful reminder and encouragement. Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing your story and your encouragement. I know that it's going to bless the listeners because it's blessed me just being here with you for this hour. And so I appreciate you coming on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to The Mom Show with Courtney Doyle. Remember to check the show notes for any links, books, or resources that are mentioned in each episode. We want to be sure this blesses other mothers. And in order to do this, if you're listening via podcast, be sure that you like and share. If you could write a review, that would be fantastic. It helps us get in front of other moms. If you're watching via YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button. This way, you won't ever miss an episode. We want to make sure that we increase our reach to other mothers who need a little encouragement, a community, and a whole lot of Jesus. We're so glad you're here.